presentation. And like I said, we're going to do a Q&A after that. Adjusting the camera. All right. So the next presentation is municipal stormwater permit audit results. So we have Isaiah Reed with us. He's a professional engineer, geologist, fossil says preparator. Is it preparer?
I don't know how detailed you want me to be.
I like it. And nonfiction author, many talents. He's from Ashe County, North Carolina. Isaiah attended Appalachian State University, majoring in geology and geography. He has worked in NPDES compliance for 9 years in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Let me welcome Isaiah.
Just use arrows there. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody asking me to come. You know, if I can at all, I try to make time for this kind of thing, as long as I've got enough notice and, you know, don't have anything else scheduled. I try to make time for as much of this as I can. I want to make sure that I'm as available as possible to the MS4 permittees in the state. So I appreciate being asked to come out here. I had a kind of list of things that I was requested to cover, and these seem to be the main points, and I'm going to try to cover those pretty quick. But essentially, we've done 107 audits since, you could say, since the program was revitalized. You could say it was, for a long time, there wasn't a lot of state oversight of the MS4 permittees in the state, and right around 2017, it started getting restructured, and we started getting the staff in place to really bolster up the MS4 program. So since then, there's been 107 audits. I've been, at least if I've crunched the numbers right, anyway, 107 audits, and I did probably the majority of those. I don't know exactly how many of them I've done several, but of those, there's been 52 notices of violation, 25 notices of deficiency, and 30 notices of compliance. So I wanted to point out a few things. Generally speaking, the larger the municipality, the better handled the program is, and that's just because of staffing. You know, anytime you have dedicated staff that are just working on stormwater, just working the MS4 program, the better the program gets handled. And what I've found is that even with the small phase twos, the small municipalities, even when they can just put, you know, one staff over their MS4 program, it ends up being a lot better. You know, because what happens is the small municipalities, the stormwater program gets handled to, say, the public works director or something like that. And in the end, it's just a little bit too many hats for that person to wear. So the small municipalities I've worked with, when they've said, okay, we're going to have one staff person that just, their whole job is making sure they're in compliance with the MS4 program, end up being much better handled programs overall. So when we talk about things to consider, one of the things that I was requested to kind of cover is that the owner of that permit will be, you know, the mayor, the town manager, city manager. That's going to be the owner of that permit. The permit is for the municipality, but that's not going to be, I guess what's the language here? If there's a violation issued for that MS4 permit, it's going to go to the city manager, the town manager, or the mayor, you know, whoever. The delegation of signatory authority can happen. And for phase ones, there's a few little special exceptions for this kind of thing, but especially for the phase twos, compliance with the MS4 permit ultimately is going to fall on the city manager, the town manager, or the mayor, depending on who the ranking official is. That's who it's all going to fall back on. And of course, you know, like I said, the NOVs and NODs are issued accordingly. There was one thing I wanted to point out here, since just based on my understanding of exactly who all would be watching or listening in. A lot of the phase two programs, the MS4 programs, were effectively non-existent when we started the audit process. We were coming into municipalities where those programs didn't exist. And one of the more frustrating things for us on the state end was that audit ends up being a training event. We end up training all the staff that's there and training staff at the level of, like public works or its wastewater treatment plants and things like that. It ends up being a very long day of just training. Here's what all your permit requires. Here's all the kind of things you need. And then we find out, a month or two after the audit, all those folks are gone. And it's really frustrating for us on the state side to realize that. So I definitely, that's not, I don't know the word to use there. It's not pleasant to see. So just try to bear that in mind, even if it's a small municipality and ends up with a notice of violation after the audit. Just remember that chances are the staff are actually trained to the point where they can, handle that permit much better than they were previously. So like I said, it's, I can't speak to everything that happens at the local government level, but that particular scenario has been, not uncommon that we find out that all those staff we worked on training are no longer there a few months later. So I had somebody asked me to go over the kind of documents that we will be looking at during the audit. So of course, the stormwater management plan, written programs, SOPs. I spend a lot of time during my audits on the IDDE program. We go through in detail the ordinance. We'll go through the ordinance and then do things like pull up example notices of violation of the ordinance and walk through them real slowly and look at all the ordinance references and make sure we'll discover that some things are out of date. The ordinance isn't exactly worded or structured the same way that the NOV suggests, things like that. So we'll spend a lot of time looking at ordinance and example NOVs. It rarely gets down to the level of really looking at like individual inspection reports and things like that. If it does, we won't spend a whole lot of time there. Mainly this is the overall documents as far as program administration goes. It's the main documents that we're wanting to look at. So this is one of the things that generates a lot of conversation during the audits, is that having that program adequately staffed and funded is a permit requirement. And it's the reason why that ends up being a big conversation is because, especially for the small MS4s, staffing is a problem. They don't have the money and availability in order to adequately fund and staff those programs. And determining if they're adequately funded and staffed is really, for the most part, on the permittee. You guys determine if you've got the staff and the funding to handle that program. And if not, and this is something that kind of goes hand in hand with other parts of the permit. If you say you've got adequate funding and staffing for the program, now that can't be used as an excuse for not meeting all the other parts of the permit. So it's advantageous to sort of approach this part of your permit compliance honestly and say, at the moment, we're not adequately staffed and funded. If you're aware enough that some parts of your program aren't being kept up to the permit standards, and that that's because of staffing and funding issues, then that's where that comes in. We've had several conversations with the small MS4s about stormwater utilities. And a lot of times, like I said earlier, if a small MS4 decides to hire one person to be dedicated to the MS4 permit, a very small stormwater utility will usually get them there. And that's usually plenty to pay that person. And, so stormwater utilities for small MS4s is an ongoing conversation with a lot of municipalities. All right, so here's some of the common things you run into during audits as far as things that create problems. Not having an approved stormwater management plan. Right now, we're in a weird situation where I came into the program with there being a huge backlog of submitted stormwater management plans that have yet to be reviewed. But what I'm really referring to here is the programs that only just now created a stormwater management plan. They just never had one before. So they've now created one and have it in place. It's a big part of compliance depends on at some point having created a stormwater management plan to work under. And there ends up being an amount of I guess confusion or explanation and conversation during these audits about the difference between the written programs and the stormwater management plan. And again, if anybody's got any questions about that, just let me know afterwards here. Of course, documentation is always a big topic, is just having all the correct documentation. And then, of course, like I was talking about earlier, going through the ordinance in detail and finding discrepancies between the ordinance and notice of violation, discrepancies between the ordinance and just sort of compliance references. And then not being familiar enough with the program. This is usually we run into this with the larger municipalities. This isn't something that usually happens with the smaller ones. The staff that's there for a really small municipality usually are very familiar with the whole program. The staff that are there for a larger municipality, for the large phase ones, a lot of times are not familiar with the whole program. And when we get into an audit and start asking questions about the program, I just wanted to include this in there because it was just a thought that I had during it. When you say, well, all that's in the annual report, why are you asking now? Right, the annual reports aren't reviewed and approved by us. They're there, the EPA requires them to be submitted and we can use them if we need. But don't expect that your auditor will come into the audit knowing what your annual report says. Because that's not part of what we do. When we do an audit, we expect you to be familiar enough with your program that we could ask any question that might be included in the annual report. You're familiar enough with it to answer that question. So anyway, that was just a thought I had as I was trying to write this stuff out. So, all right, hopefully covered all the topics everybody wanted me to cover here. And let me know if you have any questions, if all these PowerPoints are available. I'm usually in my office on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and telework Thursday and Friday, or when I'm in the field doing audits. But the best way to reach me is just by email. That's the best way to find that. So thank you.
Thank you, Isaiah. We appreciate you coming.